right to counsel seems like just the beginning. Where do you guys think it's going? It seems like obviously all these agencies that provide housing counsel need increased funding. Yeah. It seems like there's definitely not enough money in the system. Do you guys see any big changes on the horizon?
I mean, first of all, we need less eviction cases. But aside from that, we need more funding in legal service agencies to fund right to counsel, so people aren't falling through the cracks. But also, bigger picture, a lot of laws need to change. It's still structured to help landlords over tenants, despite how much the landlords want to cry and complain that all these tenants are taking their money. The system is set up for tenants to fail, and with the price of housing just continuing to go up, I unfortunately don't see any big changes in sight. I hope that it does happen, but it's hard.
Yeah. I think that this is not just a legal question, it's a political question. It's a question of political will. What is the city, state, and federal governments willing to do? They passed the right to counsel in 2018, if I understand correctly, and there are challenges with the bill, and largely it is funding, right? So from the political standpoint, when we prioritize tenants and housing as a human right, as a principle, then the law will reflect that. As it exists now, it's property is the central right that is being protected, and everything around it is just due process for tenants before they get thrown out, right? The assumption is you don't have a right to housing. We say housing is a human right, but that's not in the Constitution, that's not in the state law, it's not in the city law. So until we fundamentally move away from protecting property rights to protecting housing rights, everything that we do is going to be piecemeal. And we see that because that's what the right to counsel is, ultimately speaking. In addition to the political question, if it's going to be a legal solution, I mentioned earlier, we need a civil Gideon. We need a constitutional right to a housing lawyer, to all civil cases, frankly, in my opinion, but particularly in housing. If we don't have a constitutional right to housing, then to what extent do we have a right to housing? So that's one way that we can check the right to property that landlords have, right? And the fact that their property gives them money that allows them to influence the party, to allow them to influence the judges that are appointed, that allow them to influence inadvertently how these judges make decisions on landlord and tenant law. So those are really the two things, right? The political question, right? Do we have the will to say housing is a human right and we need to move away from protecting property to protecting housing? And then from a legal framework is how can we constitutionalize the right to attorney for tenants?
So I was watching this video about hermit crabs, and
I'm looking forward to this. Yeah.
So like hermit crabs, as they grow up, they form a line of like all the hermit crabs, and they just switch shells, like 1 to 1 to 1. Like the smallest one moves into the second largest one, and it's really cool. But that's not how we're supposed to live. Like we need to be able to live and build families and build communities in our homes. And the landlord class wants us moving around every 2 or 3 years, not having any connections with our neighbors, not having any solidarity among our neighborhoods. And so we have to, as working class people, come together and fight the landlord class so that we can have greater protections in our homes and greater protections in our neighborhoods, and also build a lot more housing. We need a lot more housing in New York City, and not just apartments, condos, co-ops, places where working class New Yorkers can own their homes, not have to worry about being taken to housing court, and build wealth between their generations. Not having to give a third to a half to 2/3 of our income every month to a landlord. Being able to build that wealth in our families and pass it in to our children and our children's children. Yeah.
So we got work to do, basically.
Yeah.
Well, conversations like this, I hope, are a step in the right direction.